So before we begin tonight, I would first like to acknowledge that we are gathered here tonight on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. These are the historic lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. And as we meet tonight to think and speak about occupation, injustice, and solidarity, let us first be clear that we do so standing on unceded Indigenous land. To begin, my name is Itrat Sayed, and I really could not possibly be more excited to be here tonight to welcome the legendary musical icon and human rights activist Roger Waters to our city. So a few logistical notes before we begin. I'd like to ask that as we meet here together, that we collectively commit ourselves to respectful and open-hearted dialogue. So let me begin first by introducing Martha. Martha Roth is a co-chair of Independent Jewish Voices Canada and a longtime activist on many fronts. She and her husband emigrated to Vancouver from the US in 2005 to get away from George W. Bush. Which at this point seems rather quaint. She marched for integrated schools in Chicago when her children were small enough to carry. She counseled draft resistors during the Vietnam years, went to jail for protesting arms trafficking, and continues to write, speak, and march against social justice and for a better world for her grandchildren.
Thank you for that lovely ovation. And we would like to, the organizers, the coalition of Palestine solidarity groups that is sponsoring tonight's event, would like to dedicate this evening to a dear friend and supporter of justice for the Palestinian people, Don Grayston, who died 2 days ago at Cottage Hospice in Vancouver. Don was a priest of the Anglican Diocese of New Westminster, BC, and had been director of the Institute for Humanities at Simon Fraser. Here's to you, dear Don. We will miss you.
So let me now introduce the man who needs no introduction. Roger Waters is one of the most important musicians of our time, a founding member of Pink Floyd. He was the creative and conceptual force behind albums like The Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall, The Final Cut. These albums continue to be the soundtrack of many of our lives, with their layered and polysemic lyrics and soaring music. Since 1984, he's been a solo artist, continuing that path with complex thematic albums and spectacular live shows. His latest album, released in June of this year, is called Is This the Life We Really Want? And what could possibly be a more apt question for this particular historical moment? Roger Waters has also been a leading voice in the global solidarity movement for Palestinian human rights. In particular, he has been an advocate for the civil society movement of BDS, Boycott, Divestments, and Sanctions. His courage and principled stand for justice has won him a legion of new fans and supporters around the world. He joins us here before his last two shows on his long North American tour called Us and Them. He'll be playing at Rogers Arena this Saturday and Sunday night, and I'm sure those concerts will be unforgettable. But tonight, he's here with us. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Roger Waters to the stage. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Now,
Good.
that's better.
All right. So I'll let Martha begin.
Right. Well, we know that you were a socially conscious youth because you helped organize the YCND, right? The Youth for Nuclear Disarmament, Youth Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. But can you tell us a bit about your journey from a young musician with an active social conscience to a musician who is a committed social activist, as you are today?
Well, welcome, by the way. What an amazing turnout. It's so beautiful to see you all here. Where to start? Probably BDS. Let's get straight to BDS.
Okay.
That is the important thing at the moment, BDS. You know, every gig that I've done so far in Canada, I've done a few, done 10 or so. At the end of each gig, I say that there are many things that I like about this great country. And one of them is the fact that Canada does not have a nuclear weapon. And people are by and large really happy about that. And so you should be. So, yeah, BDS. It's not that long ago. 11 years ago, forgive me, those of you who've heard this story, because I've been asked to repeat it so well. I was booked to do a gig in Tel Aviv, in Israel. I knew nothing about anything. Well, that's not strictly true, but anyway, I accepted to do this gig, Hayekon Park, and I started getting emails from Palestinians and others suggesting that that might be a bad idea because of this very new movement started by Palestinian civil society called BDS. And they tried to prevail upon me to cancel the gig. I talked to a number of different people, but almost immediately got put in touch with the right guy, who was Omar Barghouti, who's become a close friend of mine in the intervening years. And I did cancel that gig, but as an act of compromise, I moved the show that I was doing to an agricultural community halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem called Wahat al-Salam, also known as Neve Shalom, where they grow chickpeas, and there are Jewish people living there and Arab people living there and Christians and all sorts of people, and all their children go to school together, and so it's a beautiful experiment in how the world might look if people weren't so fixated on all the things of which we disapprove. It was an amazing success. We had 60,000 young people, nearly all young, came to the gig. Israelis, of course, because I hadn't really figured this out at the time, but nobody else can come to a gig because they're not allowed to travel around. So, it was a huge success, and at the end there were standing ovations and blah, 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 until I said, by the way, just bear with me a minute, and I said to them, I have to say this to you guys, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. You are the generation of young Israelis who must make peace with your neighbors and put an end to all this fighting and, carnage, and start figuring out how to live together. And you could have heard a pin drop. They went from to, what the fuck's he talking about? It became quite clear that they did not understand what I was saying at all, which was shocking to me. It was shocking beyond anything I could imagine, So crestfallen, I retreated, and I went back the next year and spent, I don't know, a week or 10 days there, shown around by a lady who worked for UNRWA called Allegra Pacheo. And we went all over the West Bank and we were up to Jenin and talked to lots of people and stayed with people and back down the Jordan Valley. I did not, sadly, go to Gaza, but I went everywhere else, I think. And it was shocking just to be there and see it. It was shocking. Allegra was pointing out the outposts of the settlements and the settlements themselves and explaining to me the system of military occupation that was going on. So, and I remember thinking, as we passed through checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint, we, by the way, in UN vehicles, British passports or American or whatever, we were treated with the absolute disdain, brutal disdain, by the young Israeli border guards. And I remember thinking to myself, if it's like this for me, a visiting foreigner, You know, what must be like for the people who are living under this occupation? It must be unbearable. So that was the beginning. So since then, I've sort of tried to open my big mouth as often as I can, and it's been a long, quite trying, difficult road. Not nearly as hard and trying, obviously, as living under occupation, but so I know the opposition quite well. I know the depths to which they will stoop in order to blacken my name, but it's not really. The blackening of my name is really just one more way of obscuring the truth. The thing that they want, the least of all possible things to happen, is this. They want to stop public discourse where people actually tell the truth about what happened in 47 and 48 and what happened before then and what happened since then and what happened in 67 and what happened in 73 and what is happening now. They don't want anyone to know about that. And by and large, they've succeeded south of the border here in the United States. People are kind of, duh, you know, they don't know. They're supremely ignorant about it. But, and here's the good thing, people like yourself, Independent Jewish Voices for Peace, have organized and rallied people, and slowly over the years, the demographics have changed. And so if you look at polls now of young Jewish people particularly, you find that they are no longer looking at this situation and not seeing anything. They are seeing things, and they're saying to themselves, and they're saying to other people as well, they're saying, no, this is not what Judaism is about. This is not my religion. This does not represent the way I feel about the earth and about the Almighty, if there is one, or any of that. It's completely antipathetic to that. It goes against everything that I believe in with my heart. I'm a human being. I am humane. And I do not want my people or anybody who pretends or purports to represent me and my feelings to behave like this. And that's remarkable. Well, it's not remarkable. It's what you would hope and expect to happen.
Yes.
But it's happening, and it lightens my heart every time I hear somebody speak out. It's great.
Thank you. Yes, this is not the life we want.
All right, I'll ask the next one. Your music has always been concerned with issues of power and issues of justice. But you still received a lot of criticism, even from long-term fans who say that you should separate art and politics, and music and politics. How would you respond to that?
That's just dumb. It's quite clearly supremely dumb, and it's just another method of the lobby trying to persuade people that this is an aberration.
Right.
No, this is not an aberration. You know, should Picasso not have painted Guernica?
Right.
Or anything. I mean, you could come up with a million examples. But next.
Okay. All right. So my next question is sort of connected. I'd like to ask you about solidarity more broadly. So you've dedicated much of your life to speaking up against injustices, and particularly injustices that don't necessarily impact you yourself. You've used your privilege to highlight injustice around the world. So could you speak a little to the idea of solidarity with people and with movements that don't directly impact you?
Well, where to start? When I was a kid, 5 or 6 years old, my mother was a school teacher in Cambridge in England. And she was very left-wing. She was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. My father had just been killed in the war fighting the fascists in Italy. And in the evenings, my mother was very politically active. And so she was a member of something called the British China People's Friendship Association. So she would drag me and my big brother John, his two little kids, off with her in the evening. And we would go and watch very grainy, flickery, black and white films about the heroic march of Mao Zedong and the Chinese Liberation Army, and blah, 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 blah. And we would sit on the floor and think. And we nearly always did that at the Friends Meeting House, because they were the only people that would have us, or have my mother, and things like that. I'll never forget my mother one day saying to me, she said, "You know, darling, you know I'm an atheist, you know, I don't believe in God, and blah, blah, blah." And I said, why is she telling me this? Yeah, I know that. But she was talking about the Friends Meeting House, and she said, "You know, the Quakers, I can't subscribe to their attachment, you know, to their prophet. I just can't. But they are very, very good people." And that went straight into my heart. I was 6 years old or something. And I thought, what a brilliant idea, that you can be a very, very good person. Whatever your faith or lack of it, it's completely irrelevant to the way you attach your heart to in the ways that it can empathize with other human beings in the world. So that's sort of fundamental to the way I feel about things, because it is in the attachment of our hearts to others that we derive joy in our lives, in my view. That's what gives us joy. And in consequence, that becomes one of the things that we strive for. And as we get older, we learn that things ain't going to do it, you know, and not empathizing with people is not going to do it, you know, and flying thousands of miles to kill people with drone strikes in foreign countries is not going to do it. It doesn't make us feel it brings us nothing but emotional ruin. So that's why. Restiamo umani, you know. As that Italian guy who died in Gaza a few years ago, I can never remember his name, but they made a movie called Restiamo umani, and they got a few people to read patches of it. Actually, from here I'm going somewhere to Australia and New Zealand, things. Then we're going to Europe, and that's going to be part of the way of publicizing my tour, which is called Us and Them. I inevitably on my tours carry a big inflatable pig around with me, and we're going to fly these pigs over power stations in different towns in Europe with either Restiamo umani or the equivalent in whatever the local language is, because it's a very significant and important and broad and embracing slogan.
That's wonderful. You're right about the things that do and don't bring us joy. But one of the things that does, of course, is music. So it's not so far from music to politics, I think. Mm-hmm. Solidarity, communion with others, doing something together, right?
Yeah. We could have a sing-song later.
I was going to ask you about BDS, but you've already answered that question. So
about what?
BDS.
Oh.
Do you think it's an effective way to get at Israeli government policy?
BDS?
Yeah.
It's the only thing that I've seen that's had any effect at all. They're so in bed with the government south of here that really there's little that anybody can do except shine a light, publicize, tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth, keep telling the truth, tell the truth. Because inevitably they have to keep telling the lie, tell the lie, tell the lie, tell the lie. And it's in these days that we live in where propaganda is more important, or has been seen to be more important than what is or isn't the truth of a matter. It's super important that BDS gets to shine the light. You tell the big lie often enough and it becomes the truth. This is standard, standard procedure for somebody who wants to persuade a public that something which is not true is true. Just repeat it. That's what advertising is.
True that. Over to you.
So I think the next question I wanted to sort of follow on with that and talk about why, despite its efficacy and perhaps because of its efficacy as a political tool, BDS continues to be demonized. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to meet our Prime Minister here in Canada during your time, but Justin Trudeau, who's generally constructed as the great hope from the North and the anti-Trump, the progressive anti-Trump, he also tweeted in 2015, a few months before he became Prime Minister, he tweeted that the BDS movement, like Israeli Apartheid Week, has no place on Canadian campuses.
I think I've just figured out who you're talking about. You're talking about Justin Trudeau, right?
That's right, yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, the great hope from the North, yes. So he went on to tweet that he was disappointed and hashtag enough is enough. So what advice would you give to student activists who are working towards passing BDS resolutions on their campuses?
Well, you know, that recent ECOS poll was extremely illuminating, and I think those activists should be holding up signs that say, hey, Trudeau, wake up and smell the roses. What you're saying is nonsense. And the facts are that most of your constituents know that what you're saying is nonsense, and most of your constituents would like to support the BDS movement. Most Canadians think that Canada itself should be applying sanctions to the State of Israel in order to bring it in line with international law and general basic understood notions of human rights that have existed since the Hague Convention, never mind the Geneva Conventions or the General Declaration of Human Rights in Paris in 1948. So your government is, you know, yes, last night in Edmonton, just after I said, I'm really happy you don't have a nuclear weapon, I say that it's a sort of a bit of a theatrical trick, because I'm just about to sing the song Mother, which is a song of mine, the first line of which is, Mother, do you think they'll drop the bomb? And the audience responded beautifully that, and I've entirely forgotten what point I was going to make.
Sorry.
It may well come back to me.
Okay.
But hang on, we were talking about Trudeau.
Right.
Oh, I know what it was. It's come back. The second verse goes, Mother, should I run for president? And then the second line in the second verse is, Mother, should I trust the government? And I was going, no, for exactly that reason. Maybe Trudeau is a liberal. Who knows? We'll never know. You never find out, you know, what the animal is wearing under its skin until it's actually in power. And then you start to find out. So, you know, if somebody wrote a letter to Trudeau and suggested that he even looked at the polls of what Canadian citizens think and thought maybe I should look into this and find out whether I'm just repeating the million times repeated lie that the Israeli government hope people will, in the end, accept as the truth. You know, we're a tiny little democracy. We're the only democracy in the Middle East. We have to do this to protect ourselves, otherwise blah, 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 blah. See, they should be looking at this. And it's still a mystery to me why they're not, and particularly why he's not.
Right. Despite there being a lot of polls to the effect that Canadians on the whole support.
What is it? I mean, I still don't really get it. I don't really get why people cannot look squarely at the truth of what is happening in the occupied territories, as we call them, in Palestine. What's happening in the occupied territories in Palestine is called ethnic cleansing. That is what is happening.
Yes.
And it's also called, the regime that is operated there is called apartheid.
Apartheid, yes.
That is what's being operated there.
Right.
You've no idea how many musicians in the United States I've approached saying, "Oi, weren't you the bloke who wrote the song about we ain't going to play in Sun City and whatever?" Yeah. Well, don't you think it's time we did we ain't going to play in Tel Aviv? You know, why don't we use the old recording? Ooh, that's a much more complicated question. Really? No, it's not. It's not. It's really, really simple. But it's clouded by all kinds of other issues.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So the next question I think we wanted to ask you was about the documentary that you've just narrated, The Occupation of the American Mind.
Yeah.
So the producer of that documentary, Sajali, has many connections to Vancouver, one of which is that Sajali did his PhD here at Simon Fraser University, at the university here. So the question we wanted to ask you is if you could tell us a little bit about the project and about your connection with the project.
I was in eastern Long Island, pottering about in my bare feet, and Sat rolled up one day. He sent me in some emails. Would you narrate this thing? I said, yeah. So he bushed up with 3 or 4 people and gave me some text, and I read it. That's it. Obviously, I watched it, you know, and I
Right.
think it's a very coherent and important piece. And it is significant that they still haven't had a showing in the United States of America. Well, we had one in UCLA, which was great. And we had another one. These are the ones I went to. We had another one in Mexico City about a year ago. And there was one at the Palestinian Film Festival in Chicago. And I think there was one at... Did they show it at TIFF? At the Palestinian TIFF in Toronto?
I'm not
sure.
think so. I
But that's
think so,
it.
yes.
Nobody mainstream will show it. You cannot get the movie shown. You can't find it on HBO or Netflix or anywhere. It's completely suppressed. So it's kind of significant and also deeply depressing that a film that is about the suppression of the other narrative about Israel-Palestine is itself suppressed completely, and it's almost impossible to get it shown.
Yes. Good. You seem like someone who was born with a keen sense of social justice. I mean, I love the story about your mother, but I think you probably have this innate sense. Maybe all kids do, I don't know. But do you have any ideas about how to awaken that sense in young people who don't seem born with it?
Well, you know, I'm famous for having written the lines, "We don't need no education." Obviously, we need nothing more. Education for our children is the most important thing that we could subscribe to, and we should be spending as much money on which every single child that appears in the world. We should offer them every opportunity to open their minds in every way possible and to learn everything that there is to learn or that they're capable of learning. What we tend to do is propagandize them from when they're very, very young and, you know, teach them to be good little something or other. I have to go back to my mother. My mother once said to me, and this is in a movie that bloke down there and I made together years ago, and at the beginning of the movie, it's me typing on a typewriter, and the first line is, I remember my mother saying to me one day, "Of course, darling, if the Germans had won the war, they'd have killed me because I was a communist, but they'd have probably kept you alive and turned you into a good little Nazi." Now that is chilling, because they probably would have done. You get a kid young enough, you can get them to be almost anything that you want. So all of this spreading of light is absolutely the most precious gift that we can give our children, so that they see things. They get to question everything. They get to question what we believe. They get to look at everything. They get to be allowed to make the connections between what gives them joy and what doesn't. And that's a risk that we have to take. You know, if
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Okay, so maybe we'll switch a little bit and talk about music a little bit. I wanted to ask you specifically about the song Wait for Her from your latest album, your newest album. I found it deeply moving and one of the most beautiful, sensual, grown-up love songs that I've heard ever. And I know it's adapted or inspired by a Mahmoud Darwish poem. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the song and its connection to Mahmoud Darwish.
No. It's private.
Okay.
Well, I probably could tell you some things that are not. I know what it's about now. But my notion is this. There are three bits. There's Wait for Her, and then there's another song called Oceans Apart. And then there's the final song. But basically the idea is that the Darwish poem upon which the first bit is based, which is his take on parts of the Kama Sutra, is just about falling in love. And it's just about the passion, the extraordinary intensity of that thing that can happen. If you're really lucky, maybe once in a lifetime, you might experience it. And my view is that if you do, whatever happens to that bit, you can use the experience as a transcendental moment in order for you to find parts in your heart that can be opened, not just to that man or woman or whoever it might have been, but to everybody else and to everything else, so that you can use it as a transcendental moment. And that's what I do in this, because I believe it happened to me not that long ago. So I talk about how when I laid eyes on you, when I first met you, whatever, part of me died. And then the song says, the part that is devious, mischievous, blah, blah, blah. And it lists everything negative that I could think, not just about me, but about aspects of society and others and things. And says that that part died. That part. That's the bit that wants to engage in drone warfare. That's the bit that wants to cut the heads off little girls in Saudi Arabia because they were having a dance in somebody's apartment. You know, that's the bit that is symptomatic of everything that is evil in the hearts of men. And if that part is allowed to die, then what you have left is all the rest, which is by and large is kind of good. And then at the end of the song, I say, bring me a bowl to bathe her feet in, bring me my final cigarette. It would be better by far to die in her arms than to linger in a lifetime of regret. So what I'm saying, well, it's quite easy to understand, you know. You either embrace love in your life or you don't, and if you don't, you're a beggar for the rest of your life.
My question has to do with another song from that record, and it's The Last Refugee. I framed it as the way your politics is expressed in your work, because I think that love, music, and politics are, you know, closely allied. They're three sources of passion that nourish us forever if we do them right. In The Last Refugee, the bitterly ironic lyric juxtaposes a New Year's Eve broadcast. I'm talking about the video now, with a destitute woman and her memories of her child. Can you talk about how you came to write that?
I don't think I can, but I could sit here quietly for a few minutes and see if I could remember what the seeds were. Okay. We're bombarded with images of people being driven from their homes.
Yes.
Constantly. If we're active in this work with BDS, we never move far from the key. the right of return, the idea that we've been driven from our homes, from our ancestral land, by an evil force. And so you never get far from the idea of how appalling that must feel. And then when we see, you know, the kid on the beach in Turkey, or the people drowning in the Mediterranean who are fleeing Africa, or all the refugees leaving Syria and other places, because we have made them impossible to live in. No, you know, put me up against a wall and fucking shoot me, but it's not Bashar Assad who's done it. We have done it. If they'd been left alone to figure it out for themselves, they would have had problems. So we do that. So, and it tears your heart out just to see it. It makes me very emotional even to talk about it, because I live the cushiest life that you could possibly imagine. You know, so to imagine being cold and hungry and destitute and hopeless and not knowing where you're going to get your next meal, or where you're going the next day, or how you're going to look after your children, or whatever, is incomprehensible for me. I try to understand it, but I know that I will never actually know that anguish. Well, maybe I will. You never know. Anything can happen.
Inshallah.
But so you can only think politically when you see the forces of the corporate organizing themselves with supremely damaged and demented right-wing elements of political parties, which is, you know, the places that's where the Hitlers come from. Is they come from that extreme fringe of people who feel so badly about themselves that they can't think of anything to do really except gather others of like-minded pain and agony around themselves and lash out at somebody else in order to make them feel less. I could be wrong.
Thank you.
So you know, the plight of the refugees is huge, and yet it's a problem that is going to increase, if it is a problem. And we in the rich countries, before we start sharing our wealth with the poor countries in a more general way, have an absolute responsibility to welcome these people into our communities. And to assimilate them, and to understand that in any future that's going to be worth living, we're going to have to accept the idea of cosmopolitan societies where people of different ethnicities and faiths and colors and all the rest live cheek by jowl and enjoy the richness of each other's cultures. And so, and
All right. So I think the next question we wanted to ask was about your experience of living in the U.S., which you have done for a long time now. So in the last couple of years, you've had a front row seat to the rise of the normalization of bigotry, the rise of fascism, the rise of what we might call Trumpism. So we were going to ask you what your perspective is as an insider and an outsider to this ongoing nightmare south of our border. How do you think they got there?
Well, my view is that the rise of Donald Trump specifically is actually a symptom of something that's been going on in the United States and across much of the rest of the world for the last 150 years, at least. You know, it's called consumerism, and it has become, it's the altar that the society bows down to. And capitalism as an idea has been completely accepted. And so well, once that happens, the two things happen. well, more than that, but two big things happen. One is that it is absolutely essential that you don't educate people. You have to keep people really dumb, or they would not stand for it. They would reject the idea that actually what they really need is the I-7 and go, I don't need an I-7. You know, what I need is to talk to my neighbor. And there's a lot of research and a lot of books written about all of this stuff and so on and so forth. What am I trying to say? They've accepted a system that divides us one from another, that encourages us to stay alone and encourages us to compete with one another. And encourages us to compete with one another in a way that produces winners and losers. What Trump loves the idea, I won. He thinks people give a shit. You know, he thinks that people admire him because he won. Donald, you know, wake up, brother. People do not admire you. They think you're a complete schmuck. And they're right. You know, except for this, you know, if he has a base, which I'm perfectly happy to believe that he does, you know, it's people with kind of, I nearly said guns and tattoos. I've got nothing against tattoos, by the way. But he encourages the rise of this crypto-fascism that isn't anymore. It's out front. In Louisville, they were marching in the street with torches, unconfronted by any law enforcement or by our society, by what we might want people to do if they saw that. They were encouraged. And then obviously he went on to encourage them. He sees it as a way forward in his political career, I believe, which just shows how crippled he is. But, you know, you could say, what can you do about this? What can anybody do about this on a broader political level? I think if you live in the United States, it's a long, hard, slow road up a rocky path to the understanding that your political system is completely broken, that Congress is sold to the highest bidder, and that you no longer have a democracy, and you haven't had one for 100 years, and you're never going to get one unless you stand up and do something about it. Sorry, I went a bit radical there for a minute.
It's all good. What would you say has been the role of the corporate mainstream media in facilitating or enabling or creating the monster that exists now?
Well, if you think, when was the Eisenhower speech? 61, his military-industrial complex speech. I think he was sincere, and he was clearly right, and nobody took any notice, and it's happened, and now whatever that is, and whoever controls it, however much it has to do with the Project for the New American Century, and with Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all their awful spawn and Blair and blah, 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 we will never know. We will never know how deep it goes. This stuff is, you know, is the depths of it, I believe, to be unplumbable. But nevertheless, as a general experience of living, you can see that it is inviolate, because there's no political method for getting at it. It will go on trundling on and on until, I've no idea when, how, why, what. Maybe things just have to get much, much worse. Maybe the divide between rich and poor has to get even greater. Maybe nothing will happen until all the corporations are existing in offshore entities where they don't pay any tax, they have no responsibility to society of any kind, and they can just go on, and the people who own them getting richer and richer and richer, and they can do a lot of their getting richer by making Lockheed and Boeing and Raytheon and the other weapons manufacturers bigger and bigger and bigger, and so they can go going around the world blowing up brown people just to make money, simply to make money for no other reason. I don't know. And maybe at some point there will be a huge conflagration. The problem is that if you get rid of Trump, you get Mike Pence, and that's what he wants. He is waiting for the rapture. I mean, these people are crazy. They are crazy. They're super crazy. I don't know. I can't. I'm much better talking about love.
So this would be a good way to segue to my last question, which is about hope. So this is obviously it's been a devastating couple years. There's a lot of, I think, fatigue among activists, among people who care about justice, with the rise of nativism, not just in the US, but across Europe and around the world. How do you find hope? What would you say to inspire us to continue?
You know, I 12 years ago, maybe more. No, a lot more. Hang on, 89, 99, 2000. 28 years ago. Whew. Isn't that scary?
Yes, yes.
28 years ago, I wrote an opera about the French Revolution, based on the libretto of a very good friend of mine, a Frenchman called Etienne Rodegil. And after I'd written the music, and I wrote a translation in English and blah, blah, blah. And the project goes on, I'm happy to say. We're hoping to take it back to France next year or the year after. Anyway, it's called Ça ira. Future tense of ça va, that will be. But I subtitled it, There is Hope, which is why I bring it up now. And one morning, when we were working on the recordings and adding some new lyrics that Etienne had written, we were walking down 54th Street towards Sony Studios one morning. And Etienne was an alcoholic, and so we had to stop so he could have his first quadruple shot of famous grouse, and I could have a cup of coffee. And we did, and we were sitting there, and he was sitting in the sunshine, smoking the first of about 500 Benson hedges that he would smoke that day. He was one of those beautiful, massive grey hair, incredibly brilliant, intellectual French Catalans who, if we get to meet one of them in our life, we're really... Anyway, he was there. And we were sitting there, and I said something to him, and he said this to me, and I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I still have it in my hotel room. I carry it everywhere. I used to carry it in my back pocket, but it became wrinkled, and I thought I was going to lose it. He said, he looked at me, and he went, I was here. Yeah. I felt something. And perhaps I was not alone. I mean, I know it takes a while to sink in, but when he said that to me, I thought, yeah, well, if that's what you talk about when you're sitting on 54th Street in the weak winter sunshine at 10 o'clock in the morning, drinking and smoking yourself to death, if you're attached to that idea of was I alone or not, there is hope for the rest of us if even one person is doing that sitting in the street. That's my view anyway. That's where hope resides, in the fact that human beings are beautiful and interesting and capable of philosophizing and capable of empathy and capable of love and capable of thought and capable of connection and capable of community. That gives me hope.